This is episode 11 of Come Home America with Nick Hancock, the podcast that narrates and navigates the twin crises of identity and order in America today. And we have today THO Bishop as our guest. THO Bishop is from the Mises Institute. He works their social media and press office. This is an astounding thinker in the libertarian world. He's underrated, I think. I read some great leaders in this time when we should be challenging ourselves in terms of how to operate in the political world and, with practical solutions, but also keeping in mind the grand ideas that make our movement great. And I say our movement, I do consider THO a part of like the liberty movement, and then the liberty movement's cracking up a little bit. We might get into that. I say a little bit sarcastically if you can't tell, but So, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for doing this. You're bigger than Come Home America, so I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Nick. I'm excited to be with you.
All right, great. Well, let's get started here. So, number one, people can look at your articles at Mises.org. Very easy to find you there. And one of your recent ones is on the Mises Wire. America's elites, not Trump, are responsible for undermining American democracy. And, you don't have to get into this particular article, but just your general take and maybe what's been challenging your ideas considering liberty and the country post-Trump or during Trump, and what it means for, the values that we try to espouse. Can you give me a sense of like what's changed regarding, if anything, your opinions on democracy, on decentralism, on localism, or just libertarian theory or strategy going forward? Give me a sense of where your thinking is right now.
Okay, well, to be quite honest, I mean, going back, I used to be, obviously I was a Ron Paul revolution sort of convert over to libertarianism. Back in the day, I was a really obnoxious, like neocon Republican. I mean, don't fault me. I mean, I was dumb and didn't know any better. I listened to Sean Hannity, coming home from school. But I think we all kind of had this moment as the liberty movement, with the kind of failure of Rand Paul's campaign, an absolute disaster. What exactly did we mean, and what was our standing within the Trump era? And personally, I found that, going from someone that thought the Republican Party was kind of outside of the liberty movement, had no value. Trump has been has changed my opinion a lot. It's been very rewarding to see the fact that people in my community, people that were Rick Santorum supporters in 2012, are now like actively talking about why the FBI is bad. And a lot of this comes from the fact that the voters here, what Republican voters have, and I think that we kind of saw it with the Tea Party and some of the interesting things that have gone on within the American right in the last decade or so, is that Republican voters recognized that the establishment Republicans in DC didn't really care about them, right? They recognized that their America was going away, and it wasn't just the state. I mean, there's corporate aspects to it. Conservative, the American right, lost pretty much battle in politics and with institutions, for almost a century. And what they saw in Trump was simply a fighter pushing back on it. And they wanted an outsider. They wanted to change the pace. I mean, I think that one of the kind of the lost narratives of modern politics is that in 2012, the true representation of where the Republican Party was not Mitt Romney. It was not Paul Ryan. It was Herman Cain. Herman. I don't even think Herman Cain ran expecting to be president. I don't even know Donald Trump ran in 2016 expecting to be president. I think he kind of wanted a cushy radio gig, and then yet here you had an outsider who had practical business experience, which Republicans respected, and wasn't just a politician, wasn't just an attorney, and he kind of was catching fire, and then he bowed out for side reasons, and then Trump kind of filled that void. And Trump is just the ultimate personality. He is this populist character, and kind of the beauty of Trump, I think, from our perspective as kind of like the libertarian side, the Rothbardian side, we don't like, we don't want to live in a politicized world, right? We don't want ideology infecting every aspect of our life. We just want to be left alone, want to be free to grill and things like that. Well, Trump was a non-ideological figure. He just wanted to be liked. And thankfully, I mean, the best value that Trump brought, there were some good policies he had. There were some really bad policies that he had. But mainly it was the reaction to Trump by the previous powers to be, by the press, by the Pentagon, by the CIA and FBI. That antagonism against someone that the American right saw as their defender has created this really interesting populist, opportunity. And I think going forward on the American right, the battle is going to be what form does that populism look? And the beauty of it is that, we haven't had to recreate any of this from full cloth. I mean, there's a whole cloth, there's been a lot of coverage about how some of Trump's, tone and rhetoric over the last 4 years, the kind of the Pat Buchananite sort of influences in the 90s. And, usually they come off as hit pieces, but, even I think the Washington Post had, Trump's kind of sounding like this crazy libertarian Murray Rothbard, back in the 90s. And it's true. Like you read if anybody out there that hasn't read Rothbard's article, Strategy for the Right, if you're an American libertarian, that is, I think, one of the best articles out there in strategy. How do we take these ideas and turn them into practical politics? And so really, it's kind of this really interesting, Rothbard, as he usually is, was right. He's given us a lot of stuff to work with. And it's, I find it fun on trying to take that framework and look at contemporary issues, because there's just so much that is relevant that he saw back then, including some of the schisms with the libertarian movement. And the beauty of it now is that we're living in a time where, I think much better than a strong president that is libertarian-ish is a very weak president that highlights the problems inherent with centralized power in the U.S., a country of 330 million people of all different types. We're not a single nation anymore. And what I think we're going to get in the next 4 years, assuming there's not a Hail Mary court thing that ends up throwing this the results backwards, even though that itself kind of goes to this point, is that you're going to have half the country thinking that the president of the United States is illegitimate. And that creates an opportunity there where if libertarians want to be a leader, if we actually want to win with our ideas, this is the best moment we've had, in a very, very long time. So I'm extremely white-pilled, and that's why I've been having fun, writing on Mises.org, with the Rothbard, Radio Rothbard podcast I've been doing right at Macon with some of the social media stuff, trying to get more libertarians interested in this populist right, and then also trying to get the populist right more interested in Rothbard and Mises, because we have, I think, answers on economics and some of these core questions of social cooperation that can't be ignored. So again, this is I think a very fascinating time, and I'm excited to have the position and the platform that I have.
And you're using it effectively, though. I mean, I find your work and your thought on this white pilling, as you say, and so let me turn to a survey that I saw reported in Breitbart.com that shows 72% of GOP voters want Trump's economic nationalism to lead the Republican Party. And so this comes from a poll by Echelon Insights, and it's actually a question that had three options for these people polled, and these were asked among GOP-leaning people, GOP-leaning generally, with college education and non-college education. And the three options were, given a Biden presidency, should the Republican Party continue with Donald Trump as the leader of the party? Should they only keep Trump's policies and ideas but actually move on with new leaders? Or should they abandon Trump and his ideas entirely? And what should not be surprising is that last option, totally abandoning Trump and Trumpism, if you want to call it that, always fell into a very small minority of voters. So the interest is in really split between two different thirds of those polled, one saying keep Trump as the leader, and one saying we like Trump's ideas, but maybe not Trump himself. So I feel like 4 years later, in my case, 4 years ago, I didn't vote for Trump, and then in 2020, I did. Were you in the same boat on that?
Actually, I voted for Trump in 2016.
Oh, okay. All right. So you're ahead.
Yeah.
Always ahead of the curve. So I didn't vote for anyone in 2016. Typically, I vote Libertarian for president as a protest vote, but in 2016, I couldn't even pull myself to do that, so I left it blank. And this year, it was very easy for me to vote Trump. And so, but all that said, it's like if someone asked me, what does Trump stand for? What is Trumpism? What should I take away from a poll like this? I agree with you that, about half of the country is going to see Biden as an illegitimate president, and whatever the news says, they'll see the news as illegitimate, right? And so that is a great moment for us. But how do we determine the appetite of voters who say they want more Trumpism? Like, do you know what that really consists of? I mean, what is economic nationalism really? What is the Trump vision? From my point of view, what I think we can say, really assertively and certainly, is that Trump is a fighter, and they want that fighting style, someone to champion them in the Republican Party. And so that I think people do want to see more of. But I start to get fuzzy and gray out after that. I mean, are there specific policy positions that you think are stronger for a libertarian populist in this moment than others? What do you think?
The beauty of it, again, Trump is a non-ideological figure, and what ends up happening is that people try to project their ideology onto Trump, and so you have a lot of people in the conservative movement. A lot of people like the affiliate with the American Conservative and others, and they think like, oh well, what this shows is that the future of the Republican Party is a working class coalition, which I agree with actually. And so therefore, it's time to get rid of this free market dogma because that's not successful to working class. He's like, well, I understand, they may think that, but I don't think that when Republicans say, oh, I want to keep Trump policies, they can fight that with moving away from free markets and defense of capitalism. I think what they see is that, oh, I want to keep doing what Trump's doing. And what Trump did from a policy standpoint, there was a lot of deregulation. That's one of his major accomplishments. What Trump liked doing, ultimately, was things that he could do without Congress, which are a lot of executive orders, a lot of administrative things. And then it was things that he could put his own signature to. So, for example, a lot of very serious libertarians like Cato and things like that. It's like, oh, well, Donald Trump is this great protectionist threat, right? He's the biggest protectionist president of American history. No, he really wasn't. He sounded like it. His rhetoric was classic protectionist, right? We need tariffs to develop internal manufacturing. I mean, this is Hamiltonianism 101. But you can actually look at his record. He signed all sorts of trade agreements. He renegotiated NAFTA. He didn't end NAFTA, right? He wanted his own achievements. And even with China, he was trying to, he would often use tariffs as a negotiating tactic to try to get other deals. In fact, I was not a big fan of the trade deal he was trying to work out with China because I thought that it was opening ourselves up to being actually very vulnerable on the financial services regulatory side, which kind of is an in the weeds issue. I don't want to kind of go down too far in that rabbit hole. I think there's a lot of naivete with libertarians on that China issue particularly. Mm-hmm. But so Trump wasn't trying to stop trade. He wanted his own trade deals, right? He was big on deregulation. He was very proud of his tax cuts. He was proud of the job growth. Fortunately, he was also very, he liked, he was bashing the Fed for being too tight on the money supply, right? So he was kind of an inflationist president. Fine, okay. There's some things where I think the populist right can work off of that issue, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. So again, there isn't. It's whatever you want to project. What really gets Trump, what really I think motivated Trump voters, and there's a study out there by. I tweeted it out. I'm happy to send you a link. I can't remember the name of the place off the top of my head, but it's a study that looked at, okay, well, what really was the motivating aspect for Trump voters? And I think you saw this play out in 2020 in particular, is that it was mainly cultural issues, right? It was fear of demographic changes undermining their jobs. So it was some economic instability there, economic concern, going back to, again, the idea that American politicians really didn't have their best interests at heart. It was, again, I think particularly after the last 4 years, it was an inherently patriotic pushback to tearing down George Washington statues and things like that. Anti-left, the political correctness. There was a study called Hidden Tribes that kind of try to break down on more nuanced grounds what was motivating different voting demographic groups. And it turns out, Hispanic voters, black voters were the ones that were most turned off by this big push for political correctness. I think that ended up playing out when you see the counties in America where Trump had the biggest gains. It was it was obviously Cuba down in South Florida, but also, again, incredibly how red it was on the border of Mexico, like in terms of Trump's increase. Again, this was a message that resonated throughout Hispanic voters in the country, and I think it's going to be increasingly a pushback against college privilege, right? Because obviously we're already seeing the big working up of trying to bail out student loan debt, which I personally have a little bit more of a nuanced take because a lot of this debt is held by the government. So I'm not, I'm never too big against defaulting on government held debt. But what you do have there is a major issue of those that the privileged class that were able to went to college, right? Which is not to say everybody, every degree holder, it is, but you have an overwhelmingly privileged class of college graduates against those that didn't take on that debt, that didn't go to college. That is, I think, one of those social class sort of differences there that I think it creates another opportunity again for the GOP to expand it as a working class coalition. So again, I think that what's going to end up defining the future of Trump populism and this massive political change is less Trump's platform per se, but how the people that are able to leverage this larger mistrust of institutions, wave the people that wave the Trump banner the most effectively. People like Rand Paul, for example, or Matt Gaetz, or Ron DeSantis here in the free state of Florida. They're the ones that are going to end up defining what Trumpism really means as a long-lasting arc, more so than whatever people here now are saying, oh, well, it was hostility to trade that got Trump in. So again, this creates some very interesting moments for us to try to take advantage of.
All right, and on those lines of who the next leaders would be if we weren't to have Trump, maybe not a big national leader, but my own congressman is Representative Jim Banks, who's not half bad. And he's leading the Republican Study Committee, which is the largest conservative caucus, and he has come out, from the beginning. I think even it was even pre-election. He was saying he was going to lead the Republican Party with Trumpism, and he defined it as a working class coalition. So somewhere along the lines of your thinking there, and I asked my congressman a question regarding the place audit the Fed message. I mean, if we're in a place where we can use libertarian populism to really agree with a lot of people's instincts now that are anti-institutions, distrust of a lot of these institutions, what better target than the Federal Reserve, considering, as you said, Trump has been pretty bad on the debt, pretty bad on the Fed in terms of what we actually need, which that I think at the very least would be some Volcker turn on the interest rates, or much better, a open-mindedness like Judy Shelton, or something approaching a gold standard or free market in currencies. But the reason why we're in that position where we need to talk about those things is because of the debt, and the debt used to drive some Tea Party populism. And so I asked Congressman Banks if we could put the debt at the center and really push an audit of the Federal Reserve. And I think the question caught him off guard a little bit. I mean, it was the height of election season, so people have a lot of other things going on in their minds about things. But I'm hoping that he takes time and thinks about it. Is that one issue that you think is something that would garner some coalition support with the progressive left, or are we in a position even to reach out to the left on these sorts of issues that while we're still getting our own house in order, so to speak?
Well, historically, Audit the Fed has been a pretty broad coalition issue. It's passed the House several times. It's usually where the Senate, where they galaxy brain thinking about the issue, and the pushback is always, oh well, we gotta keep an independent Fed, and this undermines independence. Like, and then you get Janet Yellen on the Treasury, and it's like,
yeah. Thank goodness Jim Banks didn't say that. Thank goodness he didn't go that route. So that was good.
But I have to say that one of my most controversial views in libertarian politics, I'm actually not an audit the Fed guy. The last thing I want to happen to the Fed is for it to be audited. Okay. The reason why is because I much prefer big spooky bank over a transparent central bank. Mm-hmm. And because we've had, what's interesting, if you look at like Dodd-Frank, it actually had a very limited audit the Fed, or a Fed audit within that, looking back at some of the extraordinary monetary policy and the purchases that they had during that era. And if you looked into it, there was all sorts of crap in there. I mean, like there was plenty of scandal-worthy stuff the Fed did. It made for great headlines on zero hedge, and it caught made for some good stuff for subcommittee hearings, but it didn't move the needle because you're trying to explain a central bank audit again from a populist perspective, right? If we're trying to figure out, okay, how do we make this issue resonate with normal people, explaining a central bank audit, I don't think is the best power we have. And you have to kind of focus on one, you have to have a very selective target. So what I think is going to perhaps be something of increasing interest is less an audit the Fed, is more of Ron Paul's old competing currency bill. And again, this is also something you have to explain, and so I understand that. But what's interesting is that the more that you have, we've seen for the last 10 years, right? One of the Tea Party era sort of things was you had a movement at the state level for gold and silver based currency bills. You yourself, I have contributed tremendous to that cause, and Tim Amendment Center's been some of the leaders, and there's been a few other organizations out there. You've had several states take the lead on that. Which is a great 10th Amendment issue. And then you also have the increasing normalization of cryptocurrency. And so what we should be saying is that, and I think that again, if you look at populism in America, American populism has always been kind of unique in that it's had a certain Jeffersonian sort of style to it against corporate privilege and state privilege. And it has actually been a very laissez-faire tradition, uniquely within the US, of populism. You go to Latin America, you talk to some of our friends down in Latin America, and you say populism, and they're horrified because populism looks like Chavez, right? In the U.S., though, Jefferson was kind of he was a hypocritical populist, but he kind of had a populist sort of spirit to him. Jackson, Van Buren, my personal favorite, Samuel Tilden after the Civil War. He was an anti-corruption, laissez-faire, sound money guy. Then the progressives took over the 20th century, and it was all downhill from then. That's why we have to repeal the 20th century is our main goal, right? But there's kind of been, it's been an anti-privilege, anti-state privilege, anti-corruption, anti-corporatist line that's really kind of been the populist spirit. And I think even Trump, these fights with big tech, these fights with the corporate press, it's fighting corporate consolidated power. And what we have, to the extent that we try to educate the population, which is always an uphill battle, I think fighting and highlighting the role of the Fed as the great consolidator of corporate power, of growing inequality, like that should be our focal point. And I think that there is some common ground there with the populist left. I also think the populist left is going to be very quickly upset with Biden. You're already seeing this pop up with, I'm as low as I thought. There's nothing smart about Joe Biden. Joe Biden's even less smart than I thought he was, because Biden seems to like throw a bone to like Bernie Sanders not to be labor secretary. Like, for one, you get Bernie Sanders out of the Senate, which would have been helpful probably down the line. And like then you give the progressive left that were very loyal this time around a little victory. They aren't even doing that. So you're going to have the genuine ideological left very upset with Biden. And so there might be some gains there if you're able to. This is something like the Tucker Carlson sort of anti-vulture capitalism sort of thing. It applies directly to this issue. And then that goes into, again, if the competing currency ties into some of these the gold, silver, old school state things, it plays into the growing cryptocurrency stuff. And what's interesting is that like Paul Gosar, he's congressman from Arizona. might be mispronouncing his last name, which is the embarrassing on my point, but he's a big Trump guy. I think he's going to be a member of, I think they're building America First caucus. He's been big on cryptocurrency. There's been other kind of people within Trump's orbit on this. And I think if there's going to be, like, if I can get like one thing kind of pushed on the monetary end, it'd be more that. Because there's no hope for the dollar. There's no hope for the debt, right? The best thing we could possibly do is to simply empower, create and focus on an individual empowerment. Help put your savings outside of politicized dollars as much as possible. Try to build for the future, because there's no hope of Washington fixing these sort of things. It's in terms of the money side and where that might play in.
Yeah.
I'd much rather see that rather than, because the last thing we want to do is to let defenders of the Fed saying, "Oh, look how transparent we are." They'll try to shoot that as is.
Very good, and again, ahead of the curve, though, Bishop. But thank you very much, because I just loved the Audit the Fed fight. As you said, it brought about like this broad coalition of people, and so it really felt like we had momentum there. Mm-hmm. But as you say, that had its time, and it's much better to talk about things that can actually build people up. I think people might get it that the Fed is a problem, but they don't have the time or the attention span to really like stay on the Fed and make it all about the Fed and audit the Fed. You've really convinced me easily that it's much better to talk about competing currencies and keep the Fed in this place as the ultimate corporatist, engine of corporatism and inequality that we see. So, okay, very good. Now, with that, you mentioned Sam Tilden, and I don't know that historical figure all that well. Can you just give a little bit about his history, and is there some strategy that he employed or some principle that he stood for that you think we should consider today?
This is something that Ryan Macon and I have been talking about on Radio Rothbard, and it's been fun to kind of go back. I mean, I've been familiar with Tilden's work for a while, but I never really kind of did a deep dive into it. It was just always kind of the Bourbon Democrats were, back in the day, like they would actually have like, big things about the gold standard and its importance, like in their party platform and the party documents, which I just kind of thought was an interesting kind of thing in history. But what's fun is that, and it's particularly come up now with the election irregularities. I've been trying to read more and kind of, we were talking about changing views earlier. Obviously there's a lot of libertarian circles that are very kind of skeptical of democracy, and I was always kind of within that camp. And I've kind of rediscovered some of the almost romantic sort of view of the American Republic, of like Gore Vidal and Bill Kauffman, and Daniel McCarthy has mentioned this on with Modern Age. A great interview with Bob Murphy recently on this, and so like that kind of got me more interested in kind of reading some of Vidal's novels on what he called it the novels on the building of the American empire, which saw the kind of corruption of it. And the interesting thing is that populism has been a weapon of the masses against corruption and grift from the elite. And this is something that Rothbard understood as well. The best are the people that we should be focusing on our libertarian strategy are the ones that are losing the most from the status quo, and that tends to be the working class. That again, they get robbed at the benefit of the elites, and the elites leverage that with the very poor to try to mobilize voters to give them the democratic numbers they need. And so Tilden is an interesting guy because, like, if we think about the stage of like post-Civil War America, I don't think it's not something we talk a lot about, but it's a fascinating period. Because with the Grant administration, for example, it was kind of like bizarro George Washington. Because here you had the greatest general in the world, right? He just won the Civil War. He was the conqueror of the South. Here he is. He's now president. And George Washington, for all of his faults, and you read Rothbard's Conceived in Liberty, you can definitely find some faults with George Washington. But George Washington saw himself as a man of history, saw himself as needing to be beyond kind of more, the normal man. Ulysses S. Grant was just one of the most corrupt presidents of American history. The railroad industry was big at this time, so again, one of the most corrupt industries in American history, the reliance upon political gifts for like land grants, things like that. And so here you had Tilden, who made his name for cleaning up massive corruption with New York political bosses. Like once upon a time, New York politics used to be the center of civilization. I mean, you had I kind of have a soft spot for Burr. You had Martin Van Buren, Murray Rothbard's favorite president. He came from Tammany Hall in New York. Well, Tilden was also from New York, and his big claim to fame was cleaning up a lot of the Bosch Tweed and some of the great corruption going on up there. And so he ran for president, trying to clean up the Grant administration. And he had an election totally, election involving 4 states with contested election results. Some common ground here. It was the integrity of the vote was totally compromised by political forces wanting to maintain control. And what ended up happening is that he ended up being betrayed by essentially members of his own party allying with the Republicans because they wanted to they weren't anti-corruption, they just wanted to be their corruption. And so Tilden, who can, all historians recognize that he should have been the elected leader. I mean, this guy's like a solid, like a proud, laissez-faire, sound money guy. He lost the presidential election because he was too good for American politics, because corruption. But his message, like that, the Democratic Party, that Bourbon Democrats at the time, was a working class coalition. It was a populist coalition. It eventually gave Grover Cleveland. Eventually kind of came from this line. So, they ended up having a little bit of success, again, before the progressives ruined everything in the 20th century. But again, there's historical examples that we can learn from this, because we don't have, again, the beautiful thing is that we don't have to recreate everything. I mean, Jeff Dice gave this talk at Mises a few years ago, is that all the hard work has been done. We get to build off of Mises. We get to build off of Hayek and Rothbard and Jefferson and Tilden. It's the hard work's done. We just have to apply it to the age that we're living in. And so it's a lot of fun kind of exploring this sort of stuff. So again, Gore Vidal's 1876, if anyone's out there looking for a good read, it's a wonderful, it's a historical novel, but it's grounded in this very fascinating period that, again, with all the election stuff, is more relevant now than ever before. Very cool.
Yeah, I wouldn't have expected to hear Gore Vidal, and I have a couple of his books on our shelves. My wife does, and so we might have to look for that 1876. So applying the hard work that's already been done, applying that to today. Let's get a little bit closer into THO's home, your backyard, your community. I'm curious because what I try to do with this podcast, as much as cover the news of the day, is sort of narrate and navigate how America does come home eventually, and it can happen in many ways, shapes, and forms. But at the local level is kind of where it all matters. So I'm just curious. A lot of people are fleeing from one part of the country to another, not happy with where they are. But you are in the free state of Florida, so how good do you have it? I mean, how are the local institutions, the mediating institutions? Do you see like Florida as a frontier for freedom in the country? And how well do you see the region as a whole, or maybe just your community? Because for most people know my story. My family, we fled Los Angeles just less than a year ago and came to Fort Wayne, Indiana. And so far it's great. We're still getting acquainted with the community, which we absolutely love. So I'm excited to get that going, but I want to hear sort of your side of that. How's it in your neck of the woods, though?
Yeah, so my wife and I, I was up in Auburn for several years with the Institute, and then I was very fortunate to be able to have the opportunity to be able to work remotely and come back home. My wife and I are both from here in Bay County, Florida, the Redneck Riviera of the free state of Florida. And it's actually very interesting because there's no other place I'd rather be, but there are issues. We actually have a massive FBI investigation going on with local government because there was basically local politics here has been controlled by essentially a cartel of contractors. And rigging of the bid process and all this sort of stuff is very interesting, actually. And it's so what people are recognizing. So there's a lot of distrust within local government. You also have, a lot of these people have been. I'm a very active member of our Republican Party here. I've always been a Republican for years, part because my family background there. But what's been great is that, again, the Trump era has normalized me. Like again, when you have people talking about abolishing the FBI, I don't particularly care the reason. It's good for us, and so I've taken over. We have a Republican club here. I use it to give very Rothbardian talks. Nobody is freaking out about the fact that you're talking about dead Austrian economists and even mentioning secession and things like this. I'm very in the mainstream, and so what I've been trying to do is focus on one of the dangers that comes when you have a corruption in a small town is that it can very easily become very toxic for a community, because you think that anybody that's had success, anybody if you have bad actors, then all actors are bad. Mm-hmm. And so what we've been trying to do is to highlight, okay, well, here are the systemic issues that created a situation where our local government became under the watch of the FBI. Some of it has to do with we have local preferencing laws that give an advantage to local contractors above people bidding in from out of town. And so that, we were kind of saying, okay, this kind of isolated them and made it easier to do the big bid rigging process and things like that. So, okay, we can't simply get rid of a few names and then expect things to be right as rain, right? There's some systemic issues. And so it's fun actually trying to figure out and identify, well, here are substantial policy things that need to be done. Because again, coming from a skill set of thinking about policy on a federal level and economics and things like that, a lot of people here don't really think about things like that. So that's a void there. Where if you're interested in these higher level thinking about political structures, there's actual value and usefulness in your community. Mm-hmm. You don't really think about it in that regard. I've been trying to get more involved with our local education system. The Mises Institute, we're giving away free copies of Economics in One Lesson. So what I've been trying to do is I've submitted copies for review with our local school board so that we can use the public school system as a means of distribution for these, because every senior in high school has to take economics here. Mm-hmm. They're always looking for new material. So I'm trying to get that and even leveraging, it can be better to have no government schools at all, but if you're going to have government schools, might as well try to use it to promote good ideas rather than socialism. And then building a personal network of people where we can have genuine conversations, because one of the greatest benefits of being with the Mises Institute, particularly in the summers when we'd have our research fellows come in, was being able to hang out, socialize, talk about the craziness of the world today, have a beer and talk about these issues in depth. And I've been very fortunate that I've been over the several years now, I've been trying to get students in Bay County scholarships to Mises U. So now I've got an inner circle where I can make Hoppe jokes with, and it's perfectly normal, right? And I've got a larger group that they think that they're the hardcore group, but so I can talk about Rothbard jokes with them. And then I've got a broader circle that they don't really understand what the Mises Institute is, but they recognize that I have more depth than most people. Mm-hmm. And so they respect that. And when you were active in your community and you take you go to talk at the city council meetings, or you speak at the Rotary Club, or you do like that, people mm-hmm. recognize if you have something substantive to say, you get respect. And one of the big things that I've been telling any friend I have out there, we know from the Liberty Movement and things like that, it's start caring a lot more about what your neighbor thinks about you than what some rando libertarian on Facebook thinks about you. You stop focusing on social media as creating a liberty ghetto where it's a safe space to simply repeat the same libertarian lines that we've been parroting for 10 years. Oh, I want gay couples to be free to own guns to protect the marijuana plant. Donald Trump Jr. shared that meme a couple of weeks ago, which is great.
Oh, he did?
He's becoming more and more like Austin Peterson every day, which is an improvement. But but that's that alone isn't enough. We need to be taking our ideas and bringing them home.
See, now you're going to send all the wrong people to the public comment at the town hall,
Well, that's okay. And the beauty of it is that what you really, I had a crazy left-wing lady go freaking out at me because our superintendent spoke at my Republican club. So she Googled me, found a hit piece by Uncooked My Campus, and so she was absolutely freaking out. It's how dare you go speak at this neo-Confederate thing? And so here's the beauty of it: is the more controversy that you get from the radical left. I mean, Bay County is a plus 53 Trump district. I only look better by comparison. So if you're out there,
right.
So it's a lot of fun again because it's making this stuff matter. You're not just there's a lot of libertarians I think that they get so their self-esteem gets kind of built on what they perceive as their own ideological purity, and consistency matters, right? Having your own ideas matter, right? But what matters more is being a valuable person in your community, right? And that's being able to get back here and grow roots, and that's been one of the most rewarding parts. Again, I know 2020 has been a chaotic year, but I personally, it's been a very rewarding one for me. Because again, my wife and I being able to be closer to family and being able to grow these networks, that's very fulfilling to me. So and if anyone out there is looking for a place to flee from, Bay County, Florida is a happening place. We've got a good network to tap into. Beautiful, world's most beautiful beaches, and the property prices are significantly higher than they were a year ago. It compares favorably to most of the other parts of the state. So Bay County, Florida should be on anyone's list.
Yeah, everyone from California, go to Bay County and leave Fort Wayne alone. Okay.
Yeah. I only want the other. What we really need is to.
No, the good people who have been watching this long, they're good people.
Your audience, I trust. Your audience, if this was on Pod Save America, I'd be really playing up the tackiness of the redneck Riviera aspect. They don't want to come here. This is not their people.
Yeah, that's not
have any hot yoga studios.
Yeah, no, that's not an institution I can really look to subvert quite yet, Pod Save America. But on all seriousness, this application of Austrian economics and history and teaching, I mean, at the local level and as you say, just speaking to clubs around your community, whether it's even your church or some other community organization, these mediating institutions are where people actually build themselves up and find real meaning and where you serve others in your community well. I think that the libertarian understanding of the free market is that people serving one another, and it's this sort of service to your fellow person that makes the market work. In particular, like producers serving consumers and all. I think that that really cannot work in an atomistic, individualistic sort of way that libertarians also get trapped in. You can't have both. You really got to pick one. And if it's a choice between atomistic individualism and this sort of quest for community, this sort of a Nisbet reference and line of thinking, it's really easy to decide which way to go. And I assume since getting married, though, you're a new man, like you're a married man, right? You're a little different than maybe you were before you met your wife or she became your wife. That's how it was for me and my wife. And so you take on these roles in whatever institution it is, whether it's marriage or some club in your community, you take on a role that's really bigger than yourself, and it helps you become who you are and serve others more, just serve others in a more fulfilling way. And so that's really what's going to be the launching pad for, a free society. And I really appreciate you sharing your perspectives on that, especially what you're doing in your local community. And, people can sort of follow that. You're like posting for the world on your Facebook page. I don't know if you're going to change your settings anytime soon, but it's like worldwide posts on those, Bay County activities. And it's so fun to watch because you get some people from your community, I assume they're locals, commenting. And, you're not getting in big arguments with them. You just slam them so hard they never come back and mess with you again. So good stuff on there. Any last comments on what I just said there?
Yeah, my Facebook page is fun because I've gotten a lot of different plates. I've got like the American Libertarian group that you have kind of the remnants of the last 10 years of the liberty movement. I've got a lot of interesting people internationally because of the Mises Institute. But what's really interesting though is the people I really slam. Like I try to be very kind to to my neighbors, right? Unless they're just totally irrational. Some of them like I have to kind of escalate it to. But like I'll tag like somebody and like I'll have rando like crazy leftists like jumping in and just being completely disrespectful, and then I enjoy that because I enjoy I like Murray. Hatred is my muse, right? Like I'm a true Rothbardian at heart, and so I have fun with it. And but really, I mean, it's been there's some groups with like with talking to like leftists that are my age or younger last few years, what I've done is I've become perhaps even more right wing than I was before, mainly just because I started taking these people seriously.
Mm-hmm.
And the more that you really understand like where a lot of these people are really coming from, the more it's kind of terrified, kind of terrified me. And so like I treat them very seriously, and so I have fun with it. And we'll see how long Facebook lets us do what we do. But I have a lot of fun being able to mix crazy Mises Institute libertarian world with Bay County, be it in real life or even on social media, is always fun. And sometimes you'll have an anarchist from Brazil going at it with a boomer from down the road, and it's just like, man, this is a match that could only happen through the wonders of my very particular Facebook timeline. So it is fun. So.
I don't know any anarchists from Brazil. You'll have to introduce me to one. But okay, well, hey, folks, subscribe to Radio Rothbard. That's those new podcasts with Ryan McMakin, produced out of the Mises Institute. Very valuable podcast. And, of course, you can find those writing at Mises.org. And though, again, I just so appreciate you coming on here. I mean, this has been very white pilling. We'll come back around to the white pilling. We need more of that now. So is there anything else you want to plug real quick? Anything else?
No, but I just want to thank you for having me. I know it can be a little long-winded, but these are topics that I'm very excited about. And so again, if you, I've been having a lot more fun on Twitter lately at Bishop. So if anyone wants to follow, you can check me out there.
Will do. All right, folks. Thank you so much for tuning in. This has been Come Home America with Nick Hancock. And please subscribe, like, follow, comment, share, all that good stuff. We sure do appreciate you joining us today, and we'll see you on the next one.